Namaskar and good afternoon to all of you. Friends, warm welcome to the 4-day Oswald Literature Festival with participation of BIMSTEC countries, Bangladesh, Bhutan, India, Myanmar, Nepal, Sri Lanka, and Thailand, which is being organized online by Sahitya Academy and Foundation of SARC Writers and Literature. And these sessions are scheduled on the Sahitya Academy YouTube channel. As you know, this festival was inaugurated by Professor Chandrasekhar Kambar, the president of Sahitya Academy, yesterday on 6th November 2022 uh, at 10 a.m. And now this is the sixth session of the festival, which is being organized today on 7th November. And we have with us four speakers who is going to be present their papers. And this session is being chaired by Sri Abhi Subedi ji, who is from Nepal. And we have three other speakers who are Afroja Soma from Bangladesh, Sampada Senvi Kunkoli Yekar from India, and Sri Kausalya Kumar Singhe from Sri Lanka. So, and we have with us Madam Ajit Kaur ji also in this session, uh, who is be with us all over this session. And warm welcome to all of you. Now we will start, and at the beginning, I may request Ms. Sampada Senvi Kunkoliekar to present her paper. Ms. Sampada.
Yeah, thank you, sir. Good afternoon, everyone. Respected Chairperson, Professor Abhi Subedi, sir, Devenji, Afroja ji, and Kumar Singhe ji. Firstly, I would like to thank Sahitya Academy and Madam Ajit Kaur ji for giving me this opportunity. It's my honor and privilege to present my paper amidst the literary giants from BIMSTEC countries. I am Sampada Shenvi Kukarkar, philosophical writer based in Goa, India. I write in three languages: Konkani, my mother tongue and official language of Goa, Marathi, and English. I have written 13 books and more than 500 articles till date. I am recipient of Sahitya Academy's Yuva Puraskar and Goa Government State Award. Currently, I am doing research on Indian philosophy and I have written an essence of Bhagavad Gita in Konkani language. Today, I will be speaking about my favorite book, Othambe, written by my favorite author, Jnanpith Awardee late Sri Ravin Kayakar. Written in the year 1999, Othambe means water droplets on the leaves. This book has immensely contributed in shaping my perception, not only as a writer, but also as a person. This book is quite first of its kind in Konkani literature, and it was inspired by the book Twilight of Idols by Friedrich Nietzsche. One can read little droplets of immense wisdom compiled in this book. This book gives us a deep insight into the world of philosophy and effortlessly covers all the aspects of life, right from character formation, education, to philosophy in the Upanishads, Buddhist philosophy, and Jain philosophy, life, immorality, and death. Writer Rabin Bab would write most complex philosophy in very simple words. He made philosophy look easy. But how is it possible? He shares his secret in this book. He says, when any writer writes in very easy language, that means he has deeply thought and reflected about all the aspects of the topic he wishes to write about. And when the subject is very clear in his mind, he has begun to write. Not only that, a writer then writes with a cause that he should share with others what he has understood. Whenever one sits to write, he should be clear about three things. What will I be writing? For whom am I writing? And why am I writing? When you have all three answers, you will be able to write in a very easy language. He adds, if you don't understand a sentence, even after reading it twice, especially when it is non-fiction, you should assume that the writer doesn't know how to write. This happens because people start thinking, what do I write when they sit down to write? No one will ever understand such piece of writing, even if you read it twice. What happens generally is when you sit to write every day, it becomes a habit. And then out of habit, a writer sits to write at a particular time, irrespective of whether he has something to say or no, because he cannot stay without writing. And just because he's a senior or accomplished writer, whatever he has written will be published. A writer should know how to control himself. Writing shouldn't become his duty, neither his vice. In between, the writer asks us interesting questions which makes a reader think, like a person can deceive the entire world, but how will he deceive himself? And sometimes he answers the questions that made him think. For example, what is the main purpose of education? The real purpose of education is to make everyone a better human being. When the downfall of a person starts, the very thought that I am bigger than everyone else marks the start of one's downfall. Talking about the greatest literature, the Upanishads, Ravin Bab says, all the Upanishads are my favorite, but Ishavasya Upanishad is my most favorite. While reflecting on Isha Upanishad's one shlok, Tene Tyakten Pujintaha Magridaha Kasya Svita Dhanam, he felt that this verse was teaching him ecology. We are only supposed to enjoy everything that nature has bestowed upon us. Do not destroy it. Eat fruits, but don't cut the tree. Drink milk, but don't kill the cow. Writer tells us 5 reasons why ordinary people become saints. First, when situation wasn't favorable, they chose to live happily. Second, they had great courage in every difficult circumstance. Third, they could have rested but still marched ahead. Fourth, they could speak but chose silence. And fifth, they could have turned bitter, but they chose to remain sweet. Further, he tells us about the true essence of democracy by giving an interesting example of late Sri Jawaharlal Nehru and his peon. Nehru has 1 vote, so does his peon. Why? Because both of them are the same. But by what means are they same? Both feel hungry, both feel thirsty. Both feel better when their hunger and thirst are satisfied. Both get tired and feel fresh after a night's good sleep. For an act of theft or killing someone, both will be punished. In this way, both are safe, but completely different when it comes to knowledge, experience, capability, success, and influence. There is a huge difference between both of them. When we say all are same in democracy, we mean no matter which caste you belong to, irrespective of your financial status, you should get a chance to succeed. There should not be any obstacle in your path towards success. No one should get extra privilege. In this sense, Nehru and his peon are equal. Writer gets hyper philosophical and says humans realize it very late that whatever they hoard is useless when death comes near. It is unfortunate that we realize nothing we own comes with us once we are dead. Speaking about immorality after death through one's work, writer says if people forget you completely after you are dead, then you aren't great. People should remember you even after you are gone. People should be influenced by your work. At least a writer should aim for this. A writer should aim to write a book that coming 10 to 20 future generations will read with interest. We may not be able to write Bhagavad Gita, but at least we should aim to write Gulliver's Travels. But our literature is also moral, just like our life. Ravindra Bab was a Gandhian, and one can sense it while reading this book. He says Gandhiji was a practical idealist, and Gandhian thoughts and values will never go out of date. Writer reminds us about Buddha's Anagat Bhayani Sutta. According to it, one never remains young forever. Everyone becomes old with age, even if you don't wish to. Therefore, we should keep learning, polish our skills at a very young age, understand important things in life. So once you age, you won't regret about things you couldn't do. Everything that you have learned will help you someday. Writer says life is like a long sadhana, which we should perform alertly and mindfully. We should stop postponing things as life speeds by. He adds, when I see a lot of hypocrites around me, my heart whispers, dare to be yourself. One who sticks to morality destroys himself completely and slowly. Searching for security kills our capability to take risks and succeed. Writer also shares his views about heaven, hell, and death. He says, heaven and hell both reside within us. If we have good relation with people around us, then we will create heaven around us. And bitter relationships create hell. In both the cases, we are the creators of heaven as well as hell, not when we are dead, but as we are alive. Death is the biggest leveler. It shows everyone their place. No matter which place you claim to be yours, but you get what you deserve once you are dead. You can't deceive anyone. Once again, I thank Sahitya Academy and Madam Ajit Kaurji for letting me present this paper. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Sampada. And friends, now may I request Ms. Afroza Shoma from Bangladesh to present his paper. Present her paper.
Thank you so very much. Am I audible?
Yeah, please.
All right. So good afternoon and greetings from Dhaka. Of this session, my dear fellow poets and writers who are about to present their paper on the very same topic. I don't know whether we have any audience right now, but if there any audience from Bangladesh, India, Pakistan, Nepal, and other countries, a very good afternoon to all of you. And I would like to thank the organizers for making me a part of this wonderful program. I really am delighted to be here with you all. This is such a mesmerizing platform to exchange our views and all, and to learn about the ground literary situations from the people who actually breathe it and live it in their respective countries. So what we see, I mean, in the name of nations, while national maps and flags divide us, literature binds us together. Literature reminds us that we, I mean, South Asian people, especially I would like to mention here 3 countries, Bangladesh, India, and Pakistan, we share the very same which is Indus Valley civilization. Also, let us not forget that historically Bangladesh is tightly, meaning Bangladesh's literary history is tightly connected with Sri Lanka and Nepal as well. So I guess all of us have heard the name of Bijoy Singha. Let us remind that Bijoy Singha, the great Sinhalese character, ruler, I'm not sure whether he was mythical or historical character or it was actually in between, not sure about that. I think that's really not that much important. Which is important is that this character once came from Bengal, and this character binds us together, Sri Lanka and Bangladesh. So let me read a quote from an article which was published recently in an online newspaper. It says that most Bengalis are introduced to the heroic exploits of Bijoy Singha in childhood from the poems of Dijendralal Roy and Satyendranath Datta. Bijoy Singha is considered the first historical ruler of Singhal Deep. It was a court, as I mentioned, and Dijendralal Roy and Satyendranath Datta, these two are such an important and highly regarded literary figures in our Bengali literature. Now let us remind us about Nepal. How are we connected? Meaning being a Bangladeshi, how am I connected to Nepal? How our history, literary history, is connected to Nepal? Let us just remind it. I believe many of you are informed about that. So if you just do Google by writing history of Chorjapada, which is Chorya in English, Charyapada, something like that. So it will take you to a wiki page where you will see it says that Charjapada, the first discovered and recognized manuscript of the Bangla literature. The manuscript was discovered by Haraprasad Shastri in 1907 from the Royal Library of Nepal. So you see, though we are different countries now, but we are really tied and connected, and we have bridges. Literature is our bridge. Today's title, which is, this session's title, Our Literature, Ancient and Contemporary. I believe it is self-explanatory. Let us look at Mahabharata and Ramayana, as Sampada Shenvi, she was talking about Upanishada. So let us look at Mahabharata and Ramayana. These two great literary pieces are still highly regarded in Bangladesh. These are not some religious books, but great literature. Originally, our literature is connected. Our mythical characters, our gods and goddesses are almost same. Look at Meghdutam. Meghdutam, which was originally written in Sanskrit. If we translate it, it says that cloud messenger. So Meghdutam, it was a great lyrical love poem written in Sanskrit by poet Kalidasa, and it was written in 5th century. The poem describes how Jokho, in Bangla we pronounce it Jokho, but in English we call it Yaksha, who had been vanished by his master to a remote region for years. And Jokho asked a cloud to take a message of love to his wife. This book, this poem is still loved by Bengali readers. So this is just a tiny part about our past, common past, how literature actually binds us. Now let us focus on recent literary scenario. So how could we forget Rabindranath Tagore? It is not only the anthem of Bangladesh, but I believe Ajit Kaur ji is here, and Sri Lankan writer is here. So all three countries shared the same writer, Rabindranath Tagore. He wrote our anthem. So if we look at the partition literature, as we are talking about recent literatures, so if we look at the partition literature, which was such a big event in the 20th century, that created hole not only in the hearts of the generation those I mean, individuals who have experienced it personally, but also this great event also created hole in the history. We still bear the pain and agony. And if we look back at the partition history, we see that Bangladesh, Pakistan, and India, these three countries produced hundreds of short stories and novels. And if we talk about partition writers, Manto's name comes first. And recently, I did a research on, I mean, my research quest was to find or to investigate the relationship between 1947 and the partition of 1947 and the Liberation War of 1971. So I wanted to look what was the relationship? How actually do the characters see these two great events? Because Liberation War of Bangladesh, it is something that has that has been influencing the South Asian history since 1971, since the war. So for that, this article was published by Routledge recently. It was last month. It was published. So to find the relationship, I scrutinized 12 novels. Out of these 12 novels, 5 was partition literature, partition novels, and the rest of the novels were based on the Liberation War 1971. So if I name the book's title, so Ranga Prabhat, it was by Abul Fazl and it was published in 1957. Khelaram Kheleja, it was written by a great poet of our recent time, Syed Shamsul Haq. It was published in 1973. Kalo Borof by Mahmudul Haq. It was published in 1992. And this man, he was also a victim of this partition. And if you read his book, you will see, I mean, the pain, it is alive. Even today, the reader could feel the intense pain and agony of displacement. It's not only the displacement, it's about even the grass that you had at your birthplace when you are forcefully, I mean, when you take everything forcefully, so it creates the hole, the wound that we can't actually deal with it. And apart from these novels, I could also mention Agun Pakhi, a recent novel which was written by Hasan Azizul Haq and published in 2006. This man, Hasan Azizul Haq, was also a displaced person who came from the other part of India. Being Muslim, he was displaced. And Icha Motir Epar Opar, it was published by Abdul Manan Soyad. It was very recently published, 2010. And the books, these books themed 1947, the partition. And if we look at the 1971, the Liberation War, the first book, it was the first novel actually on that particular theme. So Roti Aurat, it was by Anwar Pasha, published in 1973, and Hangon Nodi Granite, it was by Selina Hussain, published in 1976. Aguner Poroshmoni, it was published by Humayun Ahmed, and Jibon or Rajnoitik Bastobota, it was published very recently in 1988. It was written by one of our great novelists, Shohidul Johir. Olat Chokro was another one published in 1993. It's from Ahmad Safa, and also Ma from Anisul Haq. And another book is Talash, which was Shaheen Akhtar's novel. This novel actually portrayed the entire liberation from women's perspective. Actually, when we look at the history and when we look at our literature, you name 1947, the partition literature, or you name the Liberation War literature and history, both, if we scrutinize this history and the literature, name it, novels, stories, poems, everywhere, if we scrutinize it from gender lens, this history is very much gendered. While we see our male warriors are portrayed heroically, our war heroines, they are still, I mean, our history actually have I mean, they are not manifested anywhere. Rather, it's a part that we always feel uneasy to talk about. So we have it's a hidden part actually. And if you look at the 1947 literature, if we look at the researchers, everywhere we see that women, their pain, their agony, their what do you call it, their sacrifice, everything has been analyzed and presented and portrayed from the eyes of man. And I mean, as we are talking about the history of our literature, ancient and our recent history, I would like to focus on gender aspect as being, I mean, I myself is a gender researcher, and I have published a book last year. Its name is Besha o Bidoshir Golpo. It is a collection of essays and research articles where I try to compile the things that we have been experiencing in our country, not in our country. I mean, if we look at the South Asian countries, India, Pakistan, Bangladesh, scenario is not that much different when we analyze it from gender lens. So our history, in our history, women are, you know, they are, you know, their role is, in the literature, you will see their role is only mother, caregivers. They have been aiding you with food when you are in crisis. They have been actually helping us with by carrying weapons. But you will not find any novel where women or our girls are leaders, are the heroes. And also, you will not find the history that actually portray our war heroines as real hero. So why am I mentioning this? Because being the researcher, being an academician, being a poet and a writer, every day I breathe it. I live this history, this literature, and everywhere I can say it, and I can take all the responsibility for claiming this, that yes, everywhere in our literature, be it a literary character, be, you know, it a historical character, everywhere women and their contribution, their sacrifice is been not properly attributed. So but still, I think as we are new generation, and here I can see Sampada, Sinviji, Kaushalya, and I believe there are audience as well. we have been actually trying to scrutinize our history, our literature from a new perspective, where we try to bring that new perspective, new analysis. So, so as Butalia mentioned that in 1947, we see that women's pain, their cry, their tears, their agony was actually eloped. This part is totally, eluded. But nowadays we can see that writers have been actually focusing on that. If we look back, one of our recent novel that I just have mentioned, Agun Pakhi, in that book, there the lead character, the main character, is a woman, a nameless woman, who actually expresses her anger, her agony, her pain, her wound of displacement. Who actually remind us that it's not only the country that's been actually liberated, but also divided in the name of liberation. And at the same time, we see characters in our literature where characters expressed something like that. Those who have lived their country, those who have actually migrated to India, every night they face their country, meaning Bangladesh, they face their country and they cry in silence. So our literature, actually, I wanted to focus on the bridges. So that is why I was trying to, bring back all the bridges, all the points where we could find that we are actually tied, though our maps and our flags divide us in the name of politics, but in our heart, in our culture, we are connected. And we still have elements that could connect us. So as this South Asian festival, literary festival, if I read it properly, Sahitya Academy, it has organized this wonderful programs and sessions, series of sessions with the Foundation of SAARC Writers and Literature, which is FOSWAL. So I would like to thank Ajit Kaurji. Thank you so very much for making me a part of this wonderful program. And other participants who are here, I am eagerly waiting to listen to you. I would like to stop myself here, would not prolong my speech, but to summarize my speech in a nutshell, in a minute, to highlight a couple of points. Today, I wanted to highlight the points where we could see, we could find the ties, the bridges, not the walls. Recently, we have been experiencing that our countries, you name Bangladesh or Pakistan or Myanmar or India, we have been experiencing, restlessness in politics, restlessness in our everyday life. So we are actually creating walls to divide people in the name of religion, in the name of politics. So in this restless world, let us recall one of Arundhati Roy's quote, which is one of my favorite quotes, is, "Where do old birds go to die?" So I wanted to bring all our old ties, that we are connected together. Literature is our, connection. So let us not divide us. Let us be together. Let us spread love in the name of literature, and let us create more bridges, not walls. With these few words, I would like to thank again Ajit Kaurji, Abhi Subedi ji, Sampada ji, Kaushalya ji, and Sahitya ji for making me a part of this wonderful program. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Afroza ji. Friends, now may I request Sri Kaushalya Kumar Singhe ji, who is from Sri Lanka, to present his
Thank you. I must thank Foswal and Madam Ajit Koji and Sahitya Academy for inviting me for this event. And I'm really happy to be with this panelists, Sampada, Afroja, and Professor Subedi. Let me begin. I wouldn't say what I'm going to present can be clarified as a paper presentation. I rather prefer to call it as sharing my thoughts about the theme, our literature, ancient and contemporary in general, and in the context of Sri Lankan Sinhala literature in particular. This theme is intriguing for me mainly because of a missing term in between these two temporalities, ancient and contemporary. I think this absence of a vital conceptual element has been done deliberately to make the theme interesting by the organizing committee. This crucial conceptual category, which lies between ancient and contemporary, is modern. As we all know, modern is the most deciding factor when it comes to understanding ancient or contemporary, whether it is literature, art, politics, love, sexuality, whatever might be. Therefore, let me tell something more about this decisive term, modern. Modern primarily marks an epistemological rupture in the ways of seeing the world and life. In our part of the world, I mean post-colonial regions, we experience modernity within colonialism. Within colonial modernity, the ways of life we claim to be having in the past transformed drastically. Our ways of seeing things, our ways of thinking, ways of enjoying, ways of dressing, eating, worshipping, everything changed. We all know this. And people did not simply embrace the change wholeheartedly. They were disturbed, at least to an extent, at least some sections of the population. Then anti-colonial movements emerged, claiming our own cultural essence against the alien Western interventions. However, these movements did not reject everything. They accepted some. If you remember what Partha Chatterjee said in his book, Nation and Its Fragments, it is important to understand this. Let me quote him. I quote, "Anti-colonial nationalism creates its own domain of sovereignty within colonial society well before it begins its political battle with the imperial power. It does this by dividing the world of social institutions and practices into two domains, the material and the spiritual. The material is the domain of the outside, of the economy, of statecraft, of science and technology, a domain where the West had proved its superiority and the East had succumbed. In this domain, then Western superiority had to be acknowledged and its accomplishments carefully studied and replicated. The spiritual, on the other hand, is an inner domain bearing the essential marks of cultural identity. The greater one's success in imitating Western skills in the material domain, therefore, the greater the need to preserve the distinctness of one's spiritual culture. This formula is, I think, a fundamental feature of anti-colonial nationalisms in Asia and Africa. The colonial state, in other words, is kept out of the inner domain of national culture. But it is not as though this so-called spiritual domain is left unchanged. In fact, the nationalism launches its most powerful, creative, and historically significant project to fashion a modern national culture that is nevertheless not Western. If the nation is an imagined community, then this is where it is brought into being. End of quote. It's a long quote, sorry for that. However, this inner domain of culture becomes a contested space of numerous strands of nationalisms. In other words, there were many attempts of defining and constructing the inner domain of culture in relation to different forms of otherness. Garrett Field writes in his critique to Chatterjee, I accept the premise of inner domain, but disagree with the emphasis of Chatterjee places on intellectuals of colonized nations who create inner domain in relation to Western hegemony. So Field grounds his critique of Chatterjee on a Sri Lankan cultural movement which sought to define the nation not in relation to West, but in opposition to North India. Field builds his case on Hela Haula. This is pure Sinhala fraternity, if I put it in a crude translation, which is a group initiated by Munidasa Kumaratunga in 1941 with the sole purpose of linguistic purity of Sinhala language. Mission of Hela Haula was to reform Sinhala language based on pre-modern Sinhala textbooks of grammar and eliminate words borrowed mainly from Sanskrit and Pali. During the same period, where Hela Haula launched its mission of purifying Sinhala language, we could see the emergence of a new strand of literary criticism which evaluates ancient and medieval Sinhala texts on the basis of how Sanskrit literary culture has influenced those works. Martin Wickramasinghe, one of the pioneers of the modern Sinhala novel, becomes a prominent figure in shaping of nationalist literary criticism. Since Wickramasinghe is identified as a modern cultural icon, his work incorporated into school textbooks, university curriculum. In consequence, his work widely circulated, and more importantly, the emergence of a new generation of literary scholars and school teachers who were pedagogically shaped under his ideology, later contributed immensely to keep his influence intact in the fields of culture. Jonathan Spencer, anthropologist, correctly understood the significance of Wickramasinghe writes. He writes, Wickramasinghe did as much as anyone in creating a specifically Sinhala literary culture in the years immediately before and after the independence. His novels are now set textbooks in schools. And his vision of rural life has, as well as we shall see, done much to influence the contemporary perceptions of change and tradition. In his essay, it is called Writing Within, Anthropology, Nationalism and Culture in Sri Lanka, Spencer shows how Wickramasinghe's vision of collective rural life based on agriculture shapes the nationalist imagination. However, the scope of his essay leaves an important part of Wickramasinghe's cultural politics untouched. This is how his literary criticism attempted defining the pure Sinhala literary culture in opposition to Sanskrit literary culture. Let me translate a part of Wickramasinghe's work, a paragraph. The great poems which are based on the characters of national heroes whom are elevated into gods are evident in the ancient literature of great nations. Work of this sort, written by folk poets based on heroic stories of local rural civilizations, take a higher position of the hierarchy in literary traditions. Rigveda, Mahabharata, and Ramayana can be understood as poems of this sort. It doesn't matter how great Kalidasa is. There is a unique delight, authentic beauty, and a feeling of transcendental status that one receives from Rigveda, Upanishad, and Mahabharata that is unable to receive from Kalidasa's poems, which are based on urban civilization. Because of the Buddhism, Sinhala intellectuals pay less attention to Rigveda, Upanishad, than Ramayana, Mahabharata. In consequence, Sinhala poetry subjected to the influence of fake Indian poetry, which are based on Indian urban civilization. This is Wickramasinghe. Apparently, the way that binary oppositions shape the meaningful field of the above paragraph is not obscure. Rural and folk are used in opposed to urban, and rural and folk bring higher state of delight than the urban does. Authentic rural civilization always functions as one of the major epistemic norms of Wickramasinghe's vision of culture. Besides, one could clearly see the interesting association of the great nations with the rural cultures. According to the passage above, Sinhala poetry from 12th and 13th centuries are less delightful since they follow a tradition of fake Indian poetry, which inspired by urban civilization. So when Vikramasinghe evaluates Sinhala poetry in 12th and 13th centuries, even though his main focus is the poetic practice Alamkara, his critique perhaps leaps into the domain of morality in an ambiguous way. Vikramasinghe identifies poets in question employed Kamasutra of Vatsyayana as a source of knowledge for the poetic descriptions of erotic scenes like drinking feasts and sexual fests. Interestingly, he positioned Vatsyayana in the domain of positivist sexology and praises him of not adding poetic beauty to the realistic descriptions which reveals the rotten social wound of his times. According to him, Kama Sutra captures the reality of a decaying social world through sexuality. However, poets exploiting their linguistic capabilities decorated the wound with poetic alankara. Realistic descriptions of sex derived from the experiences of libertines, according to him, should be appreciated. Poetic alankaric mystification of sexual pleasure, which leads people toward human decadence, must be dejected. In other words, when reality of sex is decorated by poetic alankara, it leads people toward moral depravity. Later, Vikramasinghe develops his critique on Sanskrit alankara of sexual pleasure, linking it with celebration of sex in the tantric religious doctrine. According to him, tantric ideas and practices invaded the cultural sphere in India in this era of decadence, and it was impossible for poets not to be contaminated with the ideology. Celebrating worldly pleasures along with sexual joy and drinking and elevating them into higher spiritual state were caused by tantric influence. In the end of the chapter, Vikramasinghe writes, since Sri Lanka is an island and the education was controlled by monks, our civilization and religion were not affected by the above dangerous cultural decadence. Sri Lanka was protected by Theravada Buddhists from this catastrophe. Here we could see how Vikramasinghe creates the inner domain of Sinhala Buddhist culture in opposition to Sanskrit culture. Religious and cultural syncretism, which inspired medieval Sinhala literary culture in his vision, turns into a demonic other who curtailed the evolution of an authentic Sinhala literature. This is one peculiar example of how the ancient or the medieval or the pre-modern temporalities in general were constructed within 20th and 19th centuries. Therefore, the ancient which was constructed during modernity wasn't ready to celebrate the cultural cosmopolitanism of pre-modern world, what we had. Instead, the new ancient was eager to believe in Sinhala exceptionalism. So this is why we should deconstruct these categories. Sri Lanka, as Sujit Sivadunzaram in his book Islanded says, Sri Lanka has been a nodal point of migration at the center of Indian Ocean, attracting waves of traders, conquerors, and holy men from India and also from West and East Asia. Hence, this long-running history of cosmopolitanism cannot be ignored when one forms categories such as Sinhala culture or Sinhala literature. In his study of pre-modern Sinhala literature, Charles Hallisey has claimed that Sinhala literary culture have participated in more than one translocal historical formation at a time and have been inflected by the appropriation of the literary practices, genres, and values from a number of these. However, these modern nationalist, exceptionalist constructions still function as ideals or paradigms in the contemporary Sinhala literary culture. New literary works are judged and evaluated employing these ideas. And literary juries are always haunted by the 19th and 20th century ghosts. So thank you. I just try to give some of my scattered thoughts and in a way one paradigmatic example about to understand this theme, our literature, ancient and contemporary. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Mr. Kausalya Kumar Singhji. Friends, now may I request Professor Abhi Subedi ji, who is chairing this session, to present his paper or speak. Sir, kindly unmute yourself, please.
Thank you very much for your cooperation call. It has been a tremendously productive session. I don't have a paper. I don't want to present a paper looking at the time. I would like to make some observation based on the presentations made in this session and then close the session.
Okay.
That will be paper. That will be
Yeah,
paper.
please, sir.
Sampada Kunkoliankani, I pronounce your name correctly, presented a very interesting paper in which she referred to the classic for evolving the referring to the Indic wisdom, and the power of the Indic wisdom still lies in showing kind of giving a direction to the people's way of life in today's world. That doesn't become old. We don't self-eat the knowledge. You don't self-eat. You still make the knowledge productive and very powerful. And so her paper was very rich about this reference to the classic and then the essence of life, the value and the meaning of life, etc. And then she drew profound conclusion from the classics, which was very interesting part of her paper. And the next one, Afroza Soma from Bangladesh. I have not been to Bangladesh for some years. I have very good friends and important friends there, writers in Bangladesh. She referred to the very interesting references to the different forms, different genres of art in that are very productive and powerful in Bangladesh, Bangla literature. And then she referred to also to the classical poem. And the range of her presentation is very wide, because naturally the range of the literature and the epistemological content is very wide in South Asian literature, this literature of this part of the world, where we use the classical references with the life of the present and then look at them from the very modern, as Kumar Singhe was very nicely doing interpretation of the classic and in terms of the modernism and post-colonialism and so on. So Afroza referred to the liberation war of Bangladesh, which has produced a very rich body of literature. Especially, I'm very familiar with some of the writings of Bangladesh of the liberation period, and especially I'm familiar with the theater, because being a theater person, I'm very familiar with the early phase of the Bangladesh theater that I visited often, and then saw. I have friends in the theater who are still active, though they are in the not on the sunny side of life anymore, but they are still active. And then I'm very familiar. In the first phase of the Bangladesh theater, the liberation war featured very, very prominently, very strongly. Actually, it was visible. It was shown, performed on the stage. There are so many different varieties of the theater performances made at that time, and the performers, the dramatists, and the directors and the artists tried to bring the very raw. It was very fresh from the liberation time, and then the atrocities of the war of liberation were captured by the theater artists and even painters. I'm also familiar with the painters. The painters also brought out that very freshly, because we should not forget the art painting in this category. And she referred to that very interesting. I found that very interesting. The early and later, and I remember I had my friend, Professor Kaisar Haq, had sent me a PhD thesis from Monica Ali, written by a brilliant student of his from the Dhaka University of the Department of English. And she has written almost this questions examined very brilliant. I still have got the thesis somewhere here with me. And then that she evoked, Alfroza Soma evoked these various forms of the theater, the literary writings, and some of the writers she referred to are my friends and Ajit Didi's friend. And so this is a very interesting observation. But she also touched on the question of the portrayal of women during the war of liberation. On the theater, I saw some characters, the women characters, who were participating in the war of liberation. But in literature, Salima Hussain probably has used some of the characters that you very rightly referred to the writings, and you yourself being a feminist person concerned with the women's writing. That's very interesting survey you made. And Kausalya Kumar Singhe of Sri Lanka focused on this very important theoretical question of modernism and ancient culture and so on. That has always been, as he says, epistemological rupture. He referred to the cited the epistemological rupture which we are dealing with in our literary studies and other parts of the epistemology nowadays that we have developed in our literature departments in the university, and have developed courses and encourage students to do their PhD research works and so on. So you very interestingly theorized this concept of publication, and the most important point here has always remained a kind of a subject of discussion is the question of modernity. The question of modernity, the name itself, the modernity itself, that as we see evolve in the West when it focused on the individuality, the individualism, and that out of that was depicted the alienation of the individual and so on, and that became the modernist origin of the modernist literature. But we use this, like in our own department, in the department of my friends in Bangladesh and also in Delhi, they use modernism. We draw modernism from the Western definition, but we try to interpret modernism in terms of our own reality, the reality that clashes with the modernism and the post-colonialism, the reality of the colonial time rule and then consciousness, and also the language, English language for that matter. We should not forget about that. So this always clashes with this very question, modernism and coloniality, and that Kumar Singhe very nicely brought this concept in his presentation, and then he introduced this concept of discuss about the cultural alterity, Levinas theory of cultural alterity. Some years ago, when I presented a paper in Calcutta at the institute about alterity, I remember there was a lot of discussions, very fresh and powerful discussion. He referred to this question of alterity, and then the other aspect that he covered is the question of nationalism and language experiments that is happening in Sinhala. And the other point that Sri Lanka being the hub of the multinational cultures has been a center of the different cultures that came to this country and I found that part very interesting, as you said, that since the Sri Lankan writers were not actually referring to the authentic classical Indic literature, they came under the influence of the fake literature, which I had never heard. Probably scholars like you who have been doing this studies can understand that. And then he widely discussed the concept of Wickramasinghe's theory about the sexuality and tantric interpretation. My perception of tantric interpretation is slightly different from what this line of argument goes, because tantrism is in Charya Sangh, like Videsh, one scholar has very nicely written about Charya Pada. The Bangladesh lady also mentioned about the Charya Giti. Recently, one book written by Arun Shrestha, a Nepali scholar, big volume called Dancing Away to Nirvana. Charya, Dancing Away to Nirvana is the recently published book. That is to say that Charya is a kind of Vajrayanic tradition where the tantric perceptions of the body, tantric perception of body is related to the kind of nirvanic perceptions. So Charya has two manifestations, one secret, one open, prakat, as we say. The very important essence of the Indic culture, of whatever that may be, as the musicians know about that, the raga and other paintings and other forms, is the kind of a performativity. Performativity is a very, very central part of the art and literature of this region. Being a theater person, I just stress on the performativity again. And then I found that your interpretation of Wickramasinghe, the critics' theory, very interesting. And as you said very rightly, the Sri Lankan cosmopolitanism is a very interesting concept that they should focus more, and then more articles should be written on this subject. But finally, what I should want to tell is that listening to all your paper, you are all very right. You evoke the classics, you evoke the problems, you evoke the question of modernity and the clash of modernity. In this region, the overall commonality of all the papers is that the literature of this region, how to sustain and bring the literature of this region together. This was the very anxiety. This was the very anxiety that had driven Ajit Kaur Didi many years ago to put all this together and give a forum to all these scholars and say, oh, come and talk about your. And this, even though it is a very small, minuscule performance today, you did. It's a minuscule representation of that very anxiety which inspired her to bring this together. Without that brings us to another realm. The other realm is the question of organization. How do you organize the writers? How to create a forum of the writers in today's world where the importance is given to not to the art organization, but to something else. The theoretical part that Kumarasinghe discussed, we also discussed. This part we discuss in the literature departments and outside. But when you are talking in terms of the broader cultural formation, evolution, and then interaction, dialogic relationship of the knowledge and the reality, then that calls for a certain organization forum where probably people from all this region could come together and then discuss. That was the entirety.
Sir, please kindly conclude, because we have to another session within 10 minutes.
Abhijit should let us have his paper. Please.
No, I'm concluding. That is the reason why this minuscule gathering, this station, is the representation of that.
Abhijit, we want your paper.
And,
Where's your paper?
and this is my paper, actually. As I declared earlier that I will make a comment, and this, what I'm saying, is part of the paper. If I had written a paper, I would write about that, and how to put all these strands that covers the time, temporal aspect, modern aspect, postmodernist aspect, and all this reality that we are living with today, how to bring them together, an organization perhaps. and coming together through organization or through individual contact, and universities like us is one way. That is that is my paper, and I conclude the session. Thank you for participation and listening to my discourse, also very brief discourse.
You have deprived us of your
And
paper.
with due respect to Ajit Didi, I'd like to close the session as a chairman of this session. Thank you very much for your
Thank you very much, Professor Subedi, and thank you all the participants of this session for accepting our invitation and make a wonderful session of discourse. Thank you very much, our audience, to our audience also, and there is a request to share this share the link of this program on other social handles also, or unable to access this program for other lovers of literature. Thank you very much. Namaskar.